You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 233. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. I am excited to have you here with me this week for week 2 of a 3-part series where we are focused on creating more calm and less hustle in your practice. Now, if you joined me here last week, and I hope you did, then you learned all about the first step, which was how to conduct a time audit and then use that time audit to identify what belongs on your calendar and what does not belong on your calendar. And this week, we are going to focus on step 2, which is speaking with greater presence and authority. And after this week, when you come back next week, we're going to go to step 3, which is choosing to be responsive versus being reactive in your practice. Now, going back to where we started last week, and the inspiration for this podcast series is that my goal for you is that by listening to this series, you're going to be able to implement steps, practices in your day-to-day that bring to you that sense of greater calm, that greater sense of authority. So if you joined me here last week, then you know there was a challenge. I offered a challenge to you to conduct a time audit and also to identify on your calendar items that you wanted to apply the 4 Ds to. So that is do, defer, delegate, and delete. And I told you last week that I would be doing my own time audit, and I did. And the results of that audit were really impactful. And I have noticed as a result that there are areas in both my professional and my non-professional areas where I'm doing really, really well, where what I have been doing aligns highly with what I value. And I've also noticed that there were some gaps, some areas that when I saw them on paper really jumped out at me. And as a result, I have started taking very concrete steps, including hiring a business coach to help me with some of the challenges that I noticed in my practice. And I'm really excited about those changes. I've gone from feeling a bit murky and stuck to feeling very excited about what is to come, not only for myself, but for you, because I think some of the changes I'm going to make are going to make your life better. So stay tuned, keep listening, because I think my practice is really going to shift for the better in terms of being able to create more of an impact and more of an impact for you. So stay tuned. And if you did the audit and you noticed that you have some gaps that you'd like help with, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help you. And if you tried to do the audit, but it didn't quite work, or this is the first time that you're hearing about the audit and now you're curious, please do reach out to me. Listen to the episode, see what you think, take yourself through the audit, notice what comes up, and or if you want my support and you want to do that audit with me, I can help you do the audit and help you figure out what your next steps are going to be. It is such a valuable exercise. I can't begin to tell you how glad I am that I did it. I didn't do it perfectly. I did the best that I could in the time that I had. And even with that, it was very impactful. So if you haven't done the audit, you haven't listened to the last week's podcast episode, please do go back. You will learn some really interesting information about yourself, about your life, about your work, about where there's opportunities to do more of what you love and where there are opportunities to start to delete things that you do not love. So that is my report on last week and my invitation to reach out to me for help if you need it. So today, what we're talking about is speaking. Now, why did I choose speaking as step 2 in this 3-step process for creating more calm and less hustle. The reason for choosing speaking is that this is an area that is so tangible. It is so visceral. And if you're feeling hustly and nervous and stressed and anxious and under pressure, you might find that you're communicating in that way, that the way that you speak is a reflection of that you're rushing and piling on words, that you're trying to say everything all at once. And what that might be doing is undermining the sense of authority that you have. It might be undermining your confidence in yourself. It might be undermining the confidence that people have in you. And so it is a very impactful place to start if what you want to do is to experience and demonstrate a sense of calm and less hustle. So what I'm offering today are 3 steps to help you exude that presence and authority through speaking. And like last week, I'm also going to give you a challenge, an exercise for you to do this week so that when you join me next week, you will have completed that exercise. I will report on my own experience. I've already done a little bit of this. I had a call this morning where I set myself up to speak with greater presence and authority. So it's kind of fun. Maybe I'll tell you what that is next week. But anyhow, my goal for you is that you do these exercises and that you can report to me if you want. Send me a note, send me an email, set up a call, or you're simply reporting to yourself. You're showing to yourself that you can do these things and that is creating a greater sense of calm. So the reason again for choosing speaking is that it is a tangible, visceral demonstration of, or it can be, of hustle. And so what I wanted to start it with are 3 of the problems that can arise if what is happening is that you are speaking in a way that has this hustle energy, that doesn't convey your presence and authority. And from there, we're going to move to the solution. So problem number 1 is if you're speaking in a way that does not exude presence, it does not establish your authority, and what you're doing instead is speaking from this hustle energy, what you might be doing inadvertently is giving off a nervous energy, and people are picking up on it. So if you think about people in your life who have that hustly energy, who always seem like they're in a hurry, who speak really fast, maybe they speak really quietly, maybe you have a hard time following what they're saying, then you know what I'm talking about. And some of the adjectives that came to mind for me when I tried to describe that expression, that way of expressing yourself, words that came up were frantic, nervous, busy, cluttered. It's almost like your words are cluttered. They're falling over each other. It can come across as messy, right? Because what you might be saying has real value, but it's coming out so fast. It's not particularly organized. It might seem messy. And if you're rushing and piling on words, you may come across as unsure of yourself, even though you might be really smart and what you're communicating, you know that it makes sense. The way that it's coming out appears messy, and therefore people might start to read in that maybe you don't really know what it is that you're trying to say. And when you have that kind of energy, it can actually be really off-putting. And you may have heard that term, emotional contagion. Is this idea that we pick up on other people's emotions. So if you're with somebody who is very calm and soothing and methodical, you might find that you also start to adopt that energy. You start to feel more calm. You start to feel more organized. You start to see the big picture. Versus if you're with somebody who is frantic, they're sort of darting from place to place. They can't really seem to put a sentence together coolly and efficiently, then you might start to pick up on that energy and you might not like it. And so inadvertently, you start to avoid that person. So if you are coming across that way, then you may inadvertently be pushing people off. Now, I say this with love and I say this without judgment because we have all been there, right? I think of times where I've had emergencies or something has come up at the last minute. And so it feels rushed. And so I will start to speak in a more rushed way. This has happened to me in speaking engagements where I realize that I'm at my allocated time and there's still 5 more points that I want to make. And I have sometimes tried to rush those points in and I never feel good about it. I am getting better at that, but I know the feeling. I know I have done it and I am so empathetic to all of you who are doing this. And that is why we are focusing on this, because we want to be conscientious. We want to be deliberate in the way that we speak so that we come across with that authority. So that first problem is that you're giving off an energy of hustle, of being rushed, and it's undermining your authority. It's undermining the effectiveness of what you're trying to share. Now, the second problem that comes up when you are speaking in this hustly or rushed way is that you may say a lot of words, but you're not communicating your message clearly, right? You're not conveying that sense of authority. So I'm sure you've had that experience of being on the other end of what feels like a fire hose of information. It's all coming at you. It's coming at you at once, and you're trying to keep track of what's important and what's not important. And if that is you, if you are dumping information on somebody and it's all coming out in a stream of consciousness and you're hoping that that person will hear the points that really matter and pick up on those, my guess is that they are not doing it to the extent that you would wish for them to do it. And an analogy that came to mind was when you receive or when you review one of those research memos that somebody has written that is unfocused, right? It goes on for pages and you're searching for the answer. I have seen those, or cases sometimes where it feels like the judge is meandering. And I say that with the greatest respect because God bless them. They are doing a very hard job, but you know what I mean when you're reading a case and it's very clear and the writing is very succinct and you're following, you get it, versus when you're trying to kind of follow thread and it's just not clear to you. And that's what it can feel like when someone is speaking to you and they have not organized their thoughts. It's like equal airtime is being given to points that are not material to points that are material. And it's hard to sift through all that information. We know we live in an age of information where information is easy to access. ChatGPT will give you all of the information at any time of day. I mean, you can get the information. What is harder is distilling what actually matters. So if you are speaking and you're not distilling down to the key points of what you're trying to say, chances are people are getting lost. They're not understanding your message. The thing that really matters that you're saying is getting clouded in the things that don't matter, right? Another analogy comes to mind is document production. I remember this being a strategy that some lawyers would use, is that, yes, you've got all these documents and some of them have a higher degree of relevance than others. But if you've got thousands and maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents, great. Whoever is getting all of these documents is going to have to sift through them in order to find the very few documents that are going to be a game changer for the case. And so we don't want to do that to people. We don't want to inundate them with information. We want to give them the information that matters. Another example of this, right, of giving a lot of words, but not communicating your message clearly, is when you rush. When you start to rush through your words and you're rushing at the end and you're speaking faster and faster, it's really hard for the person who is trying to follow you because at that point they have been inundated with information. Now they're already exhausted and you're speaking faster and they're trying to keep up. They're trying to piece it all together and it's harder to do. And the other downside here is the faster that you speak, right? You're trying to cram it in, is that it undermines your authority because now you're no longer taking up space. It's like you're kind of saying, okay, well, I'm just going to squeeze this in. I'm just going to say this last thing. And it doesn't feel as important because you're not giving it as much space. You might think about how you display the things that really matter. If you have a trophy, you want to put that trophy on a nice clear shelf. You don't want to hide it behind all of the clutter and other knickknacks. And so you want to be able to speak in a way that the key points are jumping out. And so the person who you're speaking to, they get it, right? It's easy for them to absorb. So we've talked about these two problems. Going back to number one, you're giving off a nervous energy. By having that hustle energy, it's giving off a nervous energy and people are picking up on that and they're not really wanting to experience more of it. I'm trying to say this nicely and I'm not doing a very good job, you know what I mean. You've been around people where you've got that nervous energy. We want to do the opposite. We want to create a sense of calm and confidence with the people who you're speaking with. Number 2 is that we don't want to inundate them with a lot of words without giving them a clear message. And then 3, what can happen is if you've got that hustly energy, if you're not speaking with that authority, with presence, you might find that you're missing out on opportunities for connection and impact with the people that you are speaking to. So you can imagine if the energy is off-putting and they can't really understand what you're trying to say, you're not connecting with them, right? And they are not able to act on the things that you are talking about. So they're not connecting with you as a person. They're not really grasping your message. You're not as effective as a speaker. You walk away from that conversation feeling maybe like you did not do a good job communicating what it was that you were trying to say. That might undermine your confidence as a speaker, and you may feel even less inclined to speak in the future. And what you might also notice is that people don't seem to understand or have understood what it was that you were trying to share with them. So if you're giving instructions, for example, to another lawyer or to your assistant, and it comes out as that stream of consciousness, and what you get back in terms of work product does not match what you thought you were asking for, this might be a communication problem. This might be a great opportunity for you to reflect on, like, how did I communicate that message? And how can I do it in a way that is really crystal clear? And hopefully today's podcast episode will get you thinking about that and give you some clues in terms of how you can do that. It might also be that you are having a conversation with somebody a couple days later and you're talking about maybe a follow-up conversation, what you've already talked about, and you realize based on the conversation that you're having that they did not hear what you said, right? That there were key pieces that were missed. And that might be because there was so much contained in that conversation. There was so much that you were trying to communicate that it did not come across clearly. So those are 3 of the problems that come across with that hustly, rushed, not calm way of speaking. And that is why this week, when you go out and you practice and you're speaking to your colleagues, to your clients, to your friends, to your family, to the person at Starbucks, we are going to practice using your voice, speaking in a way that is clear, that gives you that sense of authority, that gives you that sense of calm, because we want to see in real time. And again, that goes back to this being such a great barometer. It's so visceral. It's so easy to measure the impact. Day by day, conversation by conversation, it is a focal point. It is a material way that you can start to practice that sense of calm in your day-to-day. So how are we going to do this? Number 1 is I would love for you to create in your mind's eye your ideal speaker avatar. So when you think about what an avatar is, what I'm thinking about is a symbol or an example of what it looks like to speak in a way that you want to emulate. And how I would recommend going about this is to think about other people. It's easier to think about others than it is to think about ourselves. So let's look at other people and identify who you think is a good speaker, and then drill down into why. What is it that they do that makes them an effective speaker? So you can start with people that you know. People at your firm. If you're a lawyer who works at a law firm with other lawyers, maybe there are some really great lawyers who, when they speak, other people listen. You might think of some of the senior practitioners who, when they speak at a meeting, people are paying attention. They are nodding along. They get the message. You might think about, and I'm thinking about where you might be. So I've mentioned at a law firm, you might be at an organization, for example, if you're in-house or you're working for government, or, there are other places where you might work. My invitation to you is to imagine the people that you work with or people that you interact with daily, because those are the people with whom you'll have that closest point of connection. You just want to watch them. How are they speaking? What are they doing? What do you admire about them? And you can also do the opposite. if there are people who you've noticed people don't pay as much attention to, who speak and people speak over them, or they say something and their message is ignored, what are they doing? What are they doing that is leading to that? So again, start with the people closest to you because that's your closest case study, right? You'll be able to observe them more closely than other categories. So other categories would be people like politicians. People who are in positions of authority politically, for example, tend to give really excellent speeches. You think about former President Barack Obama. He's one of the speakers that I think is very powerful and who uses pacing very effectively. He's got a very soothing voice. There's a sense of sincerity, of integrity. He's got a very warm voice. So he comes to mind. There are other speakers who are very effective. So think about who around you has a very effective speaking presence, who in the political spaces, in the celebrity spaces. There might be people in the celebrity spaces whose tone you really admire. Actors or actresses who you've noticed have a really effective way of communicating. It could be a character that somebody is playing in a TV show. How are they speaking and what do you notice about them? So in terms of creating that avatar, what you want to do is take all of those characteristics and create a model. So what are some of the characteristics that come to mind for me? They don't rush. That's the theme of these 3 weeks, right? We're trying to move away from that hustly, rushed, kind of frenetic, nervous energy into a more calm space. So not rushing. They pause. So sometimes we shy away from silence because it can feel uncomfortable. It can also be really powerful. So that might be a part of it. Pausing also gives time for that information to sink in. Again, we are in an age of information overload and people need time to process. So are you giving people time to process? Great speakers take up space. They're not afraid to use time to communicate their message, to take up space in a conversation. They may sound really deliberate when they speak. You can hear the intention in their voice. They may focus on key points. So you might notice that great speakers aren't trying to do everything all at once. They focus in on a few very key elements and it makes it easier to listen to them. A natural corollary of that is that they are leaving out weaker points. So you may have 10 really great reasons to do something. You might focus in on the top 3 and leave the other 7 because you don't want to dilute the strength of your messaging by focusing on these points that maybe aren't as persuasive. And they have a deliberate energy. So again, this goes back to this overall sense. You might not be able to put your finger on it, but they exude a sense of calm. They exude a sense of confidence. They seem very clear in their thinking, in their speaking. They seem purposeful. You might have a sense of trustworthiness, right? You inherently trust them. They seem knowledgeable. They seem prepared. So these are all of the components, the aspects of what you want to pay attention to so that when you create that avatar, you create that model for yourself, these are goals that you can set for yourself in terms of speaking. So how can you make this more tangible? Well, I would encourage you to write down some of these traits, write them down on a sheet of paper. You can come up with 5, 10, whatever number feels right to you, and create a list of the characteristics of effective speaking. And then the next part of this exercise is to imagine yourself exhibiting these qualities. We want to imagine you speaking. And I think visualization can be really impactful here. So imagine yourself standing, speaking, what your body language is like, how you hold yourself, the pacing that you're using. Maybe there's a person on the other side of you. Are they nodding along with you because they're in agreement? Chances are that is what you want. You don't want them looking away from you or looking at their phone or getting distracted. You want to be compelling in the way that you're speaking such that they are following along. They are tracking with you. So that first step then is we want to create the avatar. We want to create the model. What does effective speaking look like to you? And then imagine yourself doing that. What does that look like to you in your mind's eye? So that is your step one. So step two is when you think about a conversation that you're going to have, I strongly encourage you to curate what it is that you're going to say. Now, I walk my clients through this exercise from time to time when they have an important meeting coming up. So that could be a performance review. It could be a formal one, for example, or even an informal one. You may have an important meeting coming up with somebody in your organization who has influence over your career path. You might be trying to build out your practice, and that might involve getting other people at your firm involved. If you're in a multi-office firm, this might mean reaching out to one of your colleagues in a different office that you don't see day to day, that you don't already have a relationship with. And so that conversation, you want to plan it out. You want it to be intentional. You want to have clear goals for that conversation. You might think about conversations you're having with your client. You're about to pick up the phone. You're about to report on a case. You want to know very clearly what the key points are that you're going to communicate to your client. You don't want to go into it blind. You want to come across as prepared. You want to come across as calm. It might be you're instructing a junior lawyer. You're giving instructions to your assistant or a paralegal. So what exactly are you going to be asking for? So to me, the preparation is key because much like we did this audit last week over time and what you're choosing to spend your time on, we also want to be really intentional about the words that you're using and the message that you're communicating. And so here you want to plan out what it is that you want to say. What are the key messages? What are your key goals for a given conversation? And you might think about whether you need a specific introduction. If you're doing a more formal speech, then yes, you probably will have an introduction. If it's more informal, do you still want to have an introduction? Probably. Maybe there's a bit of warm up, a bit of, hey, how's it going? Maybe there's a report on what happened since the last time you spoke. So think about how you want to introduce the conversation, how you want to introduce the topic. You want to think about the body of what you're saying. So what are the key messages? What are the key topics for discussion? So when I think about speaking, yes, in some ways it's speaking in a one-way direction, right? I'm speaking to you. I'm communicating to you. Like this podcast is a one-way conversation. I'm hoping that by putting in the occasional question, I'm also helping you engage your own thoughts, right? I'm giving you ideas for you to reflect on. So hopefully it's not too one-sided, but here I am doing the speaking. In the speaking that we're talking about here that you're preparing for, if it's a conversation, you want to be thinking about the dialogue that you're trying to create. So the types of questions that you're asking, the types of goals that you have, right? So if this is a performance review, for example, maybe there's a component of that where, there will be a component where they share feedback with you. And there's very likely an opportunity for you to share feedback with them. So in that part of it where you're in control of the questions that you're going to ask, the direction you want to take this in. Maybe you want buy-in for a proposal that you have. So you want to think about these things in advance and have very clear outcomes for that conversation. You want to think about if there are requests. Are you asking somebody else to do something? Is there a call to action? Do you want them to take a certain action? Is there a deliverable that you are seeking? So what are you asking for? And then finally, how do you want to end your conversation? What kind of wrap up is there, right? Are you summarizing the key points of your conversation? Are you making sure that any questions they have are answered? Are you making sure they've understood the key points? What does that look like? And so before you have a conversation, now this is of course in a situation where you get to plan in advance, go through this exercise, think about what it is that you want to say. And once you've done that initial draft, let's call it, bullet points usually is what I recommend. So you've got your notes, what you want to cover in a given context, then run the 4Ds that we talked about last time through this proposed outline. The 4Ds again, do. What are the things that you see as being most important? Some filters you might ask yourself. Is this thing that I want to talk about, is it relevant? Is it necessary? Is it impactful? And if it's not, then it may not belong in that conversation. So that gives you the second D, defer. It may be that what you want to communicate to somebody is actually a multi-step process. And maybe the first step is to communicate step 1, and then you'll go back later and pick up at step 2. So for example, this podcast series started out as a single podcast episode. I mentioned this last week. I wanted to talk about creating less hustle and more calm. And I had 3 main points. And I realized once I started thinking about what I was going to say, I actually wrote notes for the podcast outline. I realized that each of these topics was really a podcast to itself. And it definitely has proven itself to be that. So last week we had a conversation all about time, right? Planning and prioritizing. This week, we're going into a nitty-gritty example, speaking, because what I'm trying to help you with is a tangible, visceral, something you can practice multiple times over the course of the week that is going to help you practice in real time what it feels like to be calm, what it feels like to have that impact, what it feels like to move away from a hustly energy, if that's what you're finding yourself in. I'm trying to take you step by step. And so what I've done here is I've deferred. And next week, we're going to talk about responsiveness versus reactivity. Yes, I could put all these 3 things into one podcast episode, but that's not how I want you to implement. I want you to feel like you can take this step by step, and at the end of 3 weeks, feel a material difference in terms of the level of calm that you feel. And so that's what we're doing here. We're deferring. I'm not taking it off the table. I'm deferring it. Delegate. Now, this is one where there's often opportunities to delegate. So instead of communicating all of it all at once and you being the one to communicate it with, is that sometimes what you really want to do is find another way to communicate information. So in spoken words, sometimes what that means is having a visual that can short circuit in a way a very complicated message into something that's really easy to see. So as I'm recording this, actually, a very impactful message comes to mind for me. If you've ever heard of or familiar with the book Essentialism, it's Greg McKeown's work. And he has this really great philosophy that you want to boil it down to the key ingredients, what is essential. And he has a visual in his book, and I'm going to try to describe it. It is a circle. Well, there's actually 2 circles. So in the first circle, you can imagine it. There's a circle, it says essentialist, and there's one arrow that sticks out of this circle, and it goes quite far. Let's say it's a 10 centimeter line that sticks out of this circle, and it's got an arrow on the end. And the point of this is that when you focus on one thing, you're going to go 10 centimeters. Now, right next to that circle, there's a circle that is the same size. In the middle, it's called non-essentialist. And there are maybe 10, 20 spokes coming out of that circle. And each of those spokes goes out. Let's say there's 10 spokes. Each one goes out 1 centimeter. So now we've got a direct comparison. You can go 10 centimeters in one direction or 1 centimeter in 10 different directions. And that visual is so impactful because you see it and right away you understand why it is that you want to be an essentialist, because you want to go really far in one direction instead of kind of far in multiple directions. So again, coming back to what we're talking about here is when you're thinking about delegating, you might think about, okay, if I'm trying to explain a really complicated concept to somebody, maybe the way to do this is for me to just tell them, here's the key point, and I'm going to send you a follow-up email that contains the data that supports it. Or, hey, I'm going to come talk to you, but I've also got this visual that's going to make it really obvious to you what it is that I'm trying to communicate here. I think about a court hearing that I was involved in years ago, because it was when I was still practicing, where we had digested some information and created a book of documents that was like a micro book of documents that contained only the relevant pages from these enormous information circulars. And so what we were able to hand up to the judge was this very concise booklet that contained just the key documents. so that they weren't forced to go through thousands of pages of information circulars and flip. No, here are the key ones. These are the ones that matter the most. So you want to do the equivalent for the people that you are speaking to. You don't want to inundate them with a ton of information. If you can delegate part of what you're trying to say to a visual, to a note, to an attachment to an email, then do that, because what you're going to do is you're going to save yourself the time of trying to explain. So I explained that visual to you that Greg McKeown offers, the Essentialist. It took me a minute or two. Imagine just seeing that, how much faster that is, and how many fewer words we would have required to actually communicate that message. So you want to delegate. How can you use delegation in your speech to make your message more effective? And then delete. Go back to those questions that we looked at for do, right? Is it relevant? Is it necessary? Is it impactful? If not, delete. And ask yourself, are you trying to say too much here? And if so, how can you pare that down? Because what we want to avoid is people losing the thread, of them not absorbing what you're saying, of those people getting lost. So stopping where we are here right now, what I have offered in terms of strategies is number one, we have curated the ideal speaker avatar. So what is it that you want your speaking to look like? What are the 5 or 10 characteristics that you want to embody? And when you envision yourself speaking that way, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How are people responding to you? You might also think about feedback people are giving you. I have done this myself when I am delivering a presentation. I think in advance about the feedback I want people to give me. What do I want people to say about this particular speech or this event? And then I use that feedback that I want from them to help craft the thing that I'm delivering. So that's number one, you're creating your ideal speaker. Number two is you are curating what you have to say. So you're creating a plan. Usually it's some bullet points about what you want to cover. We talked about organizing it into an introduction, a body, request, right? A call to action if there is one, and then a wrap up. Does everybody understand what's going on here? Before you actually implement that plan, we want to run a 4D analysis on it. Can you make sure that everything belongs there? What do you want to say? The do. What do you want to defer, right? Is there anything that belongs in a subsequent follow-up conversation? And that creates great accountability too. If you're looking at a multi-step process, you might say, listen, I'm giving you step one. When you're done with this step, I want you to come back because we're going to talk about step two. That can be really effective, especially if you're working with somebody who's new to you, somebody that you're delegating to for the first time, or you're just getting used to each other, or they've never done this before. So you want to do, you want to defer. We talked about delegating. Can you use something other than words, spoken words, to communicate the message more clearly and effectively and in a time-effective way? And then delete. If you're really, I want to say you're almost decluttering. It's like taking your message and refining it even further. What can you delete? So it's kind of like what you would want to do, but going back to that and paring it back even more. And then 3, not surprisingly, is that let's just do the thing. Let's speak the words. So practice speaking and connecting with the person in front of you. So I've got a few do's and don'ts here, right? So this is actually taking that outline and then speaking to the person, right? Whether it's the client, whether it's your junior, whether it's your boss, whether it's speaking at an event, whether it's speaking at court, right? You're trying to persuade somebody. So think about how this would show up for you. And then this do is know how you want to come across. So again, energetically, what is the energy you want to convey? You obviously want to appear confident and trustworthy and like what you're talking about. So how do you do that? Know what you're going to say before you say it. So this is really easy to do in a situation where you get to prepare, harder to do when you're on your feet. So my suggestion here is to practice doing this as much as you can. Practice preparing in advance when you can. And when you're in a situation where you don't have that luxury, hopefully what you'll find over time is that because you've practiced doing this process where you're thinking it through, that you will start to do that unconsciously and consciously. You can give yourself a moment to pause and think it through, and that these practices will become second nature for you. So know what you're going to say before you say it. That might be knowing the whole conversation. It might be just knowing the next thing that you're going to say if it's in the moment. You want to say it clearly. You want to ask for what you need clearly. So if there's an ask, you want to make sure it's very clear what you're asking for. So choose very simple, clear language. Confirm that the person has understood, and invite discussion, especially if you're in a conversation. Ask for feedback. Ask if there are any questions. Ask about follow-up. So you want to make sure there's a discussion there as well. That really helps you with that engagement piece. Now, I said there's do's and don'ts. So some of the don'ts: don't say more than you need to. Again, can you pare it down? Can you say fewer words and still get your point across? Try not to speak in run-on sentences. So verbally, end your sentence with a period. Pause. And what that does is that gives that other person a cue that you have finished a thought. It gives them time to digest what you've said, and then you can move forward. Don't, if you can avoid it, speak to fill in spaces. I get it. Silence can feel awkward. And so for that reason, we will sometimes try to fill that silence. I first learned about this years ago. Someone called it the pregnant pause. This was a woman who this was a summer job that I had, and this was the woman who was responsible for hiring people. And she told us, I don't exactly remember the context of it. I think she was training us for sales calls with customers or potential customers. And she brought up this pregnant pause. And she said, I will use a pregnant pause in a job interview because I want to see how people react when they are forced into silence, or when I don't say something and it's silent, but it's not like a comfortable silence. What do they do in that moment? And this silence for her was almost like, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? Like, is this going to be awkward? And I also love silence. Now, I can't say I use the pregnant pause for the same purposes. My use of silence most often, my most strategic use of silence is usually in a conversation, often a coaching conversation, where what I really want is to hear what the other person has to say. And it's not because I'm interviewing them and I want to rule them out based on something weird they say in a pregnant pause, which is how I first learned of this tool. To the opposite, what I'm actually looking for is the thing that is unsaid. If I leave a pause in a coaching conversation where I'm not asking a specific question, I'm just leaving the silence there. The reason I'm doing that is because what I've noticed is that that's when people are going to share the thing that is really, really important that they have not necessarily shared out loud. And it might be that they haven't shared it out loud because it has never occurred to them until that moment, right? Something in the conversation has helped crystallize something that is very important to them. It may be that they have not said this thing out loud because it's scary, and the idea of saying it to another person would make it more real. It might be that they are embarrassed to say it out loud, and actually by saying it, they realize that it's not as embarrassing as they thought it would be, that it's actually quite normal. So for me, the pregnant pause, if you want to call it that, I just like to refer to it as pause, silence, is that it invites whatever is bubbling beneath the surface. It gives it space to come into the light of day, and that can be magic. And so for you, going to the pause, when you are thinking about a strategic use of a pause, if you can use it for that reason, use that pause for some strategic objective, whether it is a pause in an examination for discovery because you want your client to say more, and that thing they're about to reveal is going to be really helpful to your case and damaging to theirs. Great. Maybe that's a strategic use for it. And in communication with one of your colleagues, that might give them the opportunity to raise a suggestion that you hadn't even thought of. So again, the don't here is don't speak simply for the sake of filling silence. Allow that silence and see what happens. You might really be surprised at some of the great nuggets that emerge. And then finally, don't repeat yourself. So I think sometimes we have a point. I know I do this sometimes. I catch myself doing this, and maybe it's old age. I don't know. But I will say the same thing more than once. And then I ask myself, why? Why did I feel the need to say this more than once? So try not to repeat yourself. Sometimes you might do it on purpose for some sort of emphasis, but largely, if you've said it already and you've said it in a way that is clear, you don't need to say it again. So just to recap very briefly, now that I've said don't repeat yourself, I'm going to blatantly repeat myself. We talked about the strategies, and I'm repeating them here for a strategic purpose, which is that I'm setting you up for your challenge this week. So these are important. So the challenge this week for you is that I want you to identify situations where you find yourself rushing and piling on words or not feeling very confident, feeling a little bit hustly. That is going to be your starting point. And from there, I would like you to kind of think about what those conversations are and what you typically do. Now, from that perspective or from that point, we are then going to prepare for one of those types of conversations by going through the steps that we just talked about. So those steps, of course, are: how do you want to come across? What is your key message and how will you communicate it? And then finally, how will you connect? Those are those do's and don'ts. How are you going to speak in the moment in a way that communicates your message and connects with that person? So you'll have the conversation, and then after you have the conversation. So the challenge is you identify a situation, you prepare for that conversation, you have the conversation, and then we're going to evaluate. So ask yourself after the conversation, what did you do well? What was really effective? Notice what didn't go so well. And chances are there are going to be things that happen that you weren't super amazed by, that you weren't super proud of. Great. That is how we learn. And then what will you do differently next time? And my challenge for you is to do that once during the course of the week. But if you can do it more than once, you are going to experience growth so much faster than if you do it just the one time. So that is your challenge, my friend. And when you come back next week, I am excited to talk to you about the third stage of this podcast series, which is responding versus reacting. And again, right, when we go back to that hustle versus non-hustle, when we think about calm, this is an area where there's so much potential, especially for lawyers who are feeling reactive in their practice. You might feel like your practice controls you, not the other way around. So we're going to slow this down. We are going to infuse your day-to-day with that sense of calm, with that responsiveness instead of that reactivity. So it has been a complete pleasure having you here with me this week. Thank you so much. I am excited for us to reconnect again next week. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, please do go back and listen to it. And for any of you who wants my support in implementing and creating that greater calm, that greater clarity, please do reach out. I would absolutely love to hear from you and learn more about how I can help you do that. So with that, have a beautiful week, and I'll look forward to reconnecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.